Well, we welcome everybody to our, I guess, first ever virtual plot tour for the Cottonwood District, and Extension is doing quite a few of these around the state, so it's something new that we're trying to bring forward to folks amid the pandemic that's going on. And we do have a wheat demonstration plot in each county, in Ellis and Barton County, and quite a few of the same varieties are in each plot, but I do have two pictures of each variety and of each variety. I just kind of have combined them together. So when you see these pictures, it may be from the Barton plot, it may be from the Ellis plot. And as always, we really appreciate our cooperators that take the time to kind of slow down and help us do these. And we really appreciate those cooperators that have helped us do these, and appreciate my coworker Alicia also helping me with these plots too. And I guess we'll just go ahead and jump into it. The next, I'll roll the slide here. Here's a little bit of the cultural information on the Ellis County plot. Both of these were planted late. Ideally, we'd like for them to have been planted earlier, but it was just, the way the year was. As you can see there in the Ellis plot, it was planted November the 5th. This is, I guess, what I would call kind of an intensively rotation crop. There is no fallow in this rotation anymore. Those farmers probably 10 or 12 years ago quit doing rotation, so we don't have any fallow in the system there. Since we did plant later, we did up the seeding rate 100 pounds per acre. You'll see there, and you can see the fertility that they've got in the herbicide. And I won't bother reading all that, but you can see that. And our cooperators are L&N Farming, which is Leon and Norbert Kuhn. They've done the wheat plot for many years now, and really appreciate those guys. They're great to work with. And then the Barton County plot here, as you can see, it was also planted late, a few days later in November. And there is fallow in this plot, and then corn was in 18. And up the seeding rate there some too. And our cooperator for this, new cooperator this year, Mike Radetsky, up in the Sault-Saint area. And we really appreciate Mike for his willingness to jump in and help us do this plot. And with that, the first variety, and this one is in the Barton County plot. I do not have it in the Ellis plot. I believe it's an Oklahoma State variety, probably a little more suited maybe south of Ellis County. So that's why we have it in the Barton plot, but not the Ellis plot. And I think I will just let our specialists take over from there. I think they're going to do a quick overview of what they've seen with the wheat crop here in the state of Kansas this year, and then they'll jump into the individual varieties and talk about them. And I believe too, if you're listening and you have some questions, might correct me if I'm wrong here, Romulo, they could probably jump in and ask a question, or they could put it into the chat box and maybe you guys could address it if there is any questions. Is that correct?
Definitely, yeah. So there is a chat box there that you can type the question in, and I've got it open here, so we can we'll be reading them either on the go or as we get to the end. So definitely, if you have any questions, just shoot it at us for sure.
Okay. And then the other thing to mention is this will be recorded, so you can go back and listen to it later, and feel free to share it with your farmer friends and let them know about it. I realize right now it's a super busy time. It's dried out enough that the planters are rolling today, planting milo, and probably we're even rolling some over the weekend. I had to go over the plots and take a few more pictures Saturday. I didn't see any planters rolling, but I did see a field being worked. So I know guys are busy trying to get the milo in now. Some moisture, and it is time. So yeah, help us spread the word that this is recorded and folks can come and listen to it later. We will have that probably posted up on our website and Facebook and so forth. So with that, I'll turn it over to probably you, Romulo. Romulo is I just call him our state wheat specialist. I think technically it's small grains Well, I better quit. I can't remember what your title is exactly. I'll let you say what your title is.
Okay, that sounds good, Stacy. Thank you. Yeah, Romulo Lovato, extension wheat and forage specialist here on the main campus in Manhattan, but covering the entire state, as Stacy mentioned. So I guess I'll start and giving an overview of what did we see in this growing season and what are we seeing in this growing season throughout the state, right? Not only in Barton and Ellis County there, but so just very briefly here, starting last fall, right? The main thing that was a concern last fall really was the dry conditions that we had, especially in the southwest corner of the state. So very far southwest Kansas, like Stanton, Hamilton counties, that region, they were extremely dry, really up to about Seward County or so. And many of those crops, although they were planted on time, they never really got enough precipitation to emerge and have a good development in the fall. In fact, they waited until a rainfall in the winter, and it was not until late January, early February that there was any emergence of those fields. So that was the biggest story of last fall, was that corner of the state. Now, perhaps talking a little bit more general throughout the state, there was also there in that central part of the state, Barton County, Rush, you guys were behind in precipitation throughout the fall. Now, you had enough moisture to get the crop up and going, but if you look at the total precipitation in the season, you guys have been behind there as well, at least up to about May 20th or so. What else was important this year as far as the wheat crop goes? We had that fall drought, and then we had in north central Kansas, that Phillips, Smith, Osborne County, there was actually a spring drought that was actually holding the crop back there for actually quite some time. North central Kansas and southwest Kansas with dry conditions. Now, another story this year was the freeze damage that we had in April 3rd and then April 13th through the 17th. That second spell, the cold temperatures were actually extremely cold and held lower temperatures for a long period of time. So in parts of the state, we did hold some freeze damage to the crop, and those include Barton and Ellis County. Actually, that's the region where we were considering that we could have the greatest amount of damage in the state, those counties and surrounding counties, and scouting some of the fields there with Stacy and other agents in the region there. We did see some freeze damage. Some of the bigger crops that were planted earlier, they lost maybe anywhere from 20 to 40% of those steelers. But with some precipitation, they actually bounced back considerably. Now, the small crops, perhaps planted after a corn out there, or as we go north in the state, that Phillips region, Smith County, after a soybean crop, the small crop was considerably hurt. So lost a lot of those steelers. Barton County is still seeing some freeze damage in the low-lying areas there as well. That's a brief overview there as far as drought and freeze damage goes. I'm not from Barton County south, really down to Meade County in the southwest, through Sumner County. That's probably the best looking wheat that we have in Kansas today. So very good yielding conditions there, very good yield potential. Lucas, would you like to give us an update on what you saw in the northwest part of the state this year?
Yeah, so I mean, as you mentioned, the biggest issue has been that April 12th, April 13th freeze. Although we'd had a couple cold shocks, about 10 days before that also contributed. But really, drought has really been, I would argue, as big or bigger of an issue than the freeze. Certainly, the dry conditions we had after that freeze really kept us from getting things back up to speed. So I've been asked a lot, what do you think, what type of crop prospects are we looking at, or at least in my territory? And, I think we're very much cruising towards an average crop. And there's a lot more downside potential, I think, than there is upside potential. Even if we had really cool grain field conditions from here on out, which the forecast is not showing. But even if we did, we're simply limited by the fact of how many tillers we lost, and there's just we're capped out on how many heads per acre we have out there. Flip side of that is if we stay unseasonably warm, if we continue to have drought conditions, I think our downside risk in terms of backing away from an average crop is much greater. So certainly a very different story compared to the yields we've kind of gotten used to the last few years throughout much of the state.
Yeah, I would kind of echo that, Lucas. You know, from the road, a lot of the fields look pretty good, but most of them that I've walked into, they're a little on the thin side. We just, you know, we finally got this moisture, but ideally we needed it a good 3 weeks earlier to really get more bang for the buck, if you will.
Yeah, thin, and the other thing I'll mention is short. You know, if we were actually having an in-person field day, I'd probably be giving my how to harvest short wheat spiel, and we've got some good data on that from the ag engineering side. So keep your eyes peeled. In an upcoming update, we'll have some tips and tricks on how to minimize harvest losses and maximize combine capacity when we're harvesting this short and thin wheat.
Okay. All right. Well, I guess.
So
Yeah, maybe
maybe
I'll make
Stacy.
some
Go.
comments
Oh,
about
yeah.
maybe I'll make some disease comments. It sounds like drought and freeze were the biggest plant health concerns for sure, but we did have some disease. Stripe rust, I think, just statewide was the biggest story, just in terms of the number of fields that had some level of infection, even though that infection was lower than it has been in previous seasons in a lot of areas. So we started to hear stripe rust reports a little bit earlier in the state. I mean, a little bit later in the state than we have in the past. So maybe around late April, we started to get the first reports and started to pick up in this part of the state in mid-May, just scattered reports from different fields. So I think some of the drought really knocked back some of the potential for big stripe rust epidemics in certain fields. One thing that we're seeing that's a concern throughout the state, and Eric has talked about this some, is that the races of stripe rust that we see are shifting a little bit. So that means, so there's a couple ways to control stripe rust. One is through genetic resistance and one is through a fungicide application. And the pathogen can adapt to both of those types of control, just like pathogen can adapt to antibiotics. So some of our new races of stripe rust that are moving in are a little bit more susceptible on varieties that used to be resistant. So we're seeing more rust on them than we would like. And so that's something that we're really keeping an eye on in the plant pathology extension group. I would say we're also hearing some sporadic reports of leaf rust in the state. So that's something we're keeping an eye on, although luckily it's moving in late. So the yield impact will be less than maybe in previous years. And then we're also getting some sporadic reports of, we were talking about this a little bit earlier before we started rolling, of septoria, tan spot, some of these leaf spotting diseases that can affect the mid canopy. Some of that was knocked back actually by the freeze. So fungi like usually warm and wet weather, so that freeze event slowed that spread down, and so that's some good news from the disease side. And then in the eastern and southeastern portion of the state, especially, one of our big worries this year is fusarium head blight. They had a lot of water in that 2 weeks window just around flowering, which is a really important time for fusarium head blight, particularly if you're in a field that's corn, that's wheat after corn or wheat after soybeans. So we're keeping an eye on fusarium head blight in the state. So those are some of the big issues. We've also seen a good amount from the virus side of wheat streak mosaics. So that's something that's popping up, especially in central Kansas, and barley yellow dwarf. So we're going to touch on those aspects, particularly the stripe rust and some of these virus issues when we're talking about the varieties. I think that those are some of the keys for this part of the state. I don't know, Eric, did I miss anything there from the disease update side of things?
No, I think that was great, Kelsey. Well done.
Yeah, and let me jump in. I apologize, I forgot to introduce everybody. Lucas Haig is our Northwest area agronomist. Kelsey Anderson is our new small grain cereals wheat plant pathologist. We welcome her aboard. Just started a month ago. Is that right, Kelsey?
Yeah.
And then
Good time to be here.
Yeah. And then Eric DeWolf, you got thrown right into the fire for sure. And then Eric DeWolf, who is our former small grain wheat plant pathologist, has moved over into another position at Kansas State, more in research and teaching, but Eric is joining us today, and we appreciate you, Eric, as well. Kelsey, one of the things I jotted down on my notes I thought of yesterday is, and I know you guys have seen it, mentioned it in the agronomy e-updates, but I sure got quite a few calls this year, loose smut. You might maybe just touch on that just for a minute. And I kind of know why we probably saw more of it this year with the way the prices are. There's probably a little more seed wheat being kept back and maybe not being treated with the fungicide, which I fully understand, and sure saw more of it this year.
Yeah, we were seeing it a good amount too when we were scouting fields. Some of that is normal, but I think it was edging above that normal level for sure. And so that's one of those that that fungus can actually, if you see that one head, that all of those are basically spores. All that black stuff that's in that head is a spore, a big mass of spores, and that can affect all the neighboring plants essentially. So if you save your seed year to year, then the level of seeds that will become infected will increase over time. So if you have 1% infected in one season and you save that seed and you don't apply a seed treatment, then you'll have maybe 10% more infected or 5% more infected in the next season. So it's really a function of saving seed. So if your seed was infected in the previous season, you'll have more infection in the next season. And then almost all seed treatment fungicides are effective at controlling loose smut and some of these other seed-borne diseases. So I think at a certain level that starts to become a yield problem, this loose smut. If you have a certain amount of heads infected, those heads just won't yield. So I think those are going to be the keys to kind of squishing that problem before it becomes a bigger problem next year. I don't know if Eric has any other comments on that.
So maybe the only other thing I would add is that I think coverage is key for a lot of these seed treatments. That I think whatever option you choose, whether you have your seed professionally treated or purchase treated seed, kind of like Kelsey's indicating, renewing your seed supply on a regular basis, using fungicide seed treatments and making sure you've got good coverage of that seed works out well. Maybe where that could still be a little bit of an issue is if you are doing something on farm, you want to make sure that you're getting good coverage. And I know some growers over the years that haven't had great success with some of the maybe planter box type of treatments. So be careful with that. Make sure you've got good coverage. It's not going to be enough to just dribble it over the top of the grain drills, stir it with a stick a few times and put it in drive and off you go. You're going to want to make sure you've got good coverage there to get the most out of your fungicide seed treatment.
Yep. Okay, I think if there's no other comments there, we'll jump into the varieties. And I kind of had mentioned the first variety, and this is over in the Barton plot. It's not in the Ellis plot. I believe this is an Oklahoma State variety, Green Hammer.
Hi, Stacy. Yeah, this is definitely an Oklahoma State variety, relatively new release there from OSU. With that said, probably the area of adaptation for this variety will be a little bit further south than what we are here. Perhaps in southern Barton County, southeast Barton County, but I still think might be a little bit of a stretch there. It has performed quite well, like in Sumner County, for example. Right, so the yield there last year was actually pretty decent for a Green Hammer, but again, we're quite a ways from Sumner County, even there in Barton. With that said, it's a good grazing wheat, so it's part of that graze plus grain system. So dual-purpose wheat variety with good hash and fly tolerance, good acid soil tolerance. It's a little bit tall, so it can lodge sometimes, medium early maturity. So again, for the grazing and grain type of system might be a fit, but I think even in Barton County might be a little bit too far north there. Eric, any comments on Green Hammers, or Kelsey, any comments on Green Hammers disease package?
So Green Hammer looks like a interesting variety out of Oklahoma State. I think it does have a better overall disease package than some others. I think as we've been looking at stripe rust leaf rust this year, we've maybe gotten a few mixed signals. Right now, I probably would put it in that moderately resistant to intermediate as kind of what we've been seeing it. So yeah, I think this is interesting from a disease perspective, and that like a lot of Oklahoma varieties, it's bringing in some of that intermediate to moderately resistant reaction to leaf rust, maybe a little better on some of the leaf spotting diseases like tan spot than some of the other Oklahoma varieties.
So up next here, we have a WB4792. This is a new Westbred release. So just a brief overview on the Westbred numbering system there. The 4, it means it is just the wheat type. So hard red, winter wheat, all of them are going to start in 4s. 7 is maturity. So in this case, a 7 is a medium late maturing variety. If it was a 2, this would have been a medium early one. The third number, number 9 there, it's the year when this was released, so 2019. And then 2 is just a random number. So WB4792, again, a medium late maturing variety with an excellent standability. So straw strength is actually really, really good on these 4792 here. Last year, and I've seen it standing quite well under conditions where other varieties, even with decent straw strength, were at least leaning or lodging. So very good standability. Yield record in Western Kansas was actually very good last year as well on this one. So perhaps in Ellis County or Western Ellis County might be a good one. Now, keep in mind that it doesn't have, I think, soil-borne mosaic virus resistance there. So Kelsey, maybe that can limit its adoption as we go east, correct?
Definitely, yeah. So it is susceptible to soil-borne mosaic, although intermediate for wheat streak mosaic. So that's something important to consider in this part of the state. So we've seen this one less because it is a new 2019 variety. So we like to see what Westbred says about it, but we also like to see it in Kansas state testing to make sure it holds up against the local pathogen pressure. But so far, so Westbred's saying that this is a good stripe rust resistant variety, and so far we're seeing it perform really well for stripe rust in some of the USDA testing here. So overall, I think a fairly good disease package. The only red flag, as Romulo pointed out, would be that soil-borne mosaic.
So LCS Valen is one like 4792. Another one I think we need to be keeping a close watch on. Has looked really good in the trial data we've seen in the last couple of years. Performance tests, more of a medium early maturity. So we think about T158 having a lot of acres at one time in the Cottonwood district. Balance, maybe something that helps us replace that maturity group, but. So yeah, medium early maturing, medium height, yield record on it's been quite strong, and so yeah, I think it's one we need to keep a close eye on. And assuming 2020 doesn't give us any surprises, one that probably belongs on the short list.
So LCS Valiant is susceptible to wheat streak mosaic, so I think that's something we're maybe going to have to keep an eye on. Looks like it's been a little more intermediate to the rust pathogen. So let's be a little cautious about the wheat streak mosaic. I know Ellis County over the years has had some problems with that particular group of viruses, but I think with that in mind, I think this would be one for the short list.
So Tatanka has been out from the Hayes program for a couple of years now. A really strong yield record with it. Probably its Achilles heel's been a little bit below average straw strength. And I think here a little bit later in the plot, we've got several other new varieties out of the Hayes program, Western Star and Dallas. And I think eventually we'll see them probably take some acres away from Tatanka. And so if you're using it and you're happy with it, there's really no reason to get rid of it at the moment, but I think we probably have better things coming.
Yeah, I'd echo that. I think Tatanka, I'd watch out for the wheat streak mosaic virus susceptibility. So I think some of those other varieties, like Dallas, for example, would be a better fit if you're looking to control wheat streak mosaic. Tatanka is a little better than average for leaf rust and stripe rust, though. So if it might be a good option if you're thinking of saving a fungicide application, for example, for those diseases.
So WB 4269 here coming up next. So this one is a variety that, as you see by the two there, medium early maturing variety. Really, this variety would be more adapted to the central and eastern part of the state. So perhaps that Barton County and maybe eastern Barton County could be a good fit. I think as we move to Ellis County and like especially western Ellis County, I don't think it has the drought tolerance that we need for year in, year out yield consistency out there. So again, keep this in mind more for the eastern portion of the region here, and especially as we move eastern in the state there. For 269, it's a very good tillering variety, and it produces a lot of very small heads. That's where the yield comes from. 4269, very decent straw strength on this one here. 2018 release out of Westbred, early maturing wheat, and good straw strength. Now, this one, Eric, is one that usually we talk about following those corn acres, correct?
Well, this is a possibility to try and talk about one of the other diseases that can be important in central and eastern Kansas, and Fusarium head blight or head scab. So I made the comment about following acres of corn. Remember, the Fusarium fungus survives right in that corn residue and other grass crops. Like wheat, so wheat on wheat, wheat into corn ground, particularly in irrigated situations in the western or west central portion of the state, we might see a little bit elevated pressure for Fusarium head blight, and 4269 is one that has an intermediate to moderately resistant reaction there. So we're starting to see more and more tools in the toolbox, more varieties with that level of resistance. So this is a pretty strong variety for central and eastern Kansas from that perspective. For this area of the state where we sometimes have problems with wheat streak mosaic, I was glancing at my notes here and noticed that 4269 is really vulnerable there. So I think we'd want to be cautious with the wheat streak mosaic if you know historically you've had problems with that disease in your area.
Solera is a variety out of K-State breeding program in Manhattan. It's a variety, though, that is released more of like a central and a little bit going into western Kansas type of adaptation there. It has overlay on its background and some carbon 92 and a semi-spring wheat there as well. Medium maturing variety and medium to medium late, more towards the medium maturity and medium tall variety there. So what I mean here, a little bit taller than what I used to seeing coming out of those of the Eastern program here at K-State. Decent drought tolerance. It's probably not going to be a Langdon or a Western or a Kansas-Dallas type of drought tolerance, but it allows it to move probably to Ellis County quite well there. Has a very good straw strength. It was named in honor of Larry Payton, I think. Eric might give a little bit more of a background there, but so maybe one to keep an eye on, probably in the central part, but as we move west, the drought tolerance on this one, we might have better options as far as drought tolerance goes there. What about its disease package here, Eric?
Yeah, so Larry Patton was a longtime breeder, breeding technician for the Manhattan breeding program. So this was named in his honor to remember his contribution to that program over the years. Larry's vulnerabilities on the disease side would be leaf rust is probably what's hurt Larry the most. For many years during Larry's development, we hadn't seen a lot of disease pressure from leaf rust, and Larry was looking really strong. As it's released and gotten out on some considerable acreage, we've seen it get dinged a few times with with leaf rust towards the end of the grain filling period. And I think that, as much as anything, has hurt Larry over the years. Also keep an eye on that wheat streak mosaic susceptibility. Once again, so many of our varieties, including Larry, have a vulnerability there. This is one, like Kelsey mentioned in the beginning, we've seen maybe a little bit more stripe rust on Larry than we have historically. So I think I would also add stripe rust as something we want to watch. Keep an eye out for leaf rust primarily, but also watch the stripe rust susceptibility. So Larry, I think, would be a pretty good fit for this area of the state, but may require a fungicide on a big stripe rust, leaf rust type of year.
Paradise, it's a variety that has been licensed to Polanski Seed, together with another one that we might talk in a little bit later here, Rockstar as well. Paradise, more of a centrally adapted variety. It is a medium early maturing variety, and so this year we saw Paradise get hurt from that freeze damage, perhaps a little bit worse than some of the later maturing varieties. But again, that was true for any of those medium early maturing varieties. They were just growing a little bit further along that within the same planting date, it got hurt a little bit worse than some of the later maturing varieties there. Yield record has been, I guess, okay there in central Kansas, a little bit less stable than what kind of we like to see. Sometimes it turned out in the top of the trial and did very well. And then a year like last year, where we had some scab concerns, it was more towards the bottom of the trial there. So a little bit of a not very stable yield record that we have, at least around Kansas here. Pretty good end use quality on this one. The head type is kind of like, looks like a little bit 44-58 type, a wide head like that. Kelsey, what are we seeing as far as disease damage here, or disease reactions here on Paradise?
Yeah, so I think you hit one of the key vulnerabilities, and that's for fusarium head blight. So fairly susceptible to fusarium head blight. A little bit more moderate for some of the other leaf diseases like tan spot. Has been holding up pretty well for leaf rust and stripe rust so far. So that's good news. And then intermediate for wheat streak mosaic. So I would say average to a little susceptible across the board. It might be one that would benefit from a fungicide application, especially in those high FHB risk years.
So SY Monument has been out for a number of years, and has pretty, I believe Romulus said at one of our earlier plot tours, statewide has the most acreage of any variety in the state. We probably see less of it as we move west. I don't think it's got decent drought tolerance, but not, I think we have stronger options as we move further west, but certainly within Cottonwood district, we see significant acres of Monument, good yield potential in it. Kind of that medium maturity, straw strength, maybe not quite what we'd like to see in a variety, but all in all, still, despite it getting a few years of age on it, I still think a pretty solid choice for central into slightly west central Kansas.
Yeah, for Monument from the disease side, I think, again, fusarium head blight is something that you're going to have to watch because it is susceptible. That's only a problem in years where it's a particularly big risk and after corn, remember, so maybe that won't be so bad. And then otherwise, Monument has a good disease package across the board. So if you want to invest in some of that disease resistance in genetics, that this might be a good option. We're seeing it hold up well to leaf rust and to stripe rust, although this is one of those, like I mentioned earlier, we have some of these race shifts going on, so we're seeing a little more stripe rust than we would like on Monument, so we're watching that, but otherwise a very solid disease package.
So WB Grainfield, again, kind of in the same ballpark as Monument in terms of being very widely adaptable in a wide range of geographies and production systems. I tend to, I guess in my opinion, I think Grainfield has a little bit better drought tolerance package than Monument. We see it do a little better in western Kansas. But in terms of maturity, we see that vary a little bit across locations in terms of when actual heading date comes along. So a little bit difference in terms of how it proportions time to heading versus grain field duration compared to other varieties that we would call being the same maturity. Despite its age, it's getting a few years on it, but yield record still remains quite strong. So it's going to be interesting here in the next year or two what variety can overtake grain field in terms of being that truly widely adaptable variety in terms of yield potential. So again, it's we see it on a lot of acres. I don't think there's any reason yet to move away from it. But yeah, it'd be interesting how it evolves over the next few years.
I think from the plant health side of things, grain field is widely adapted, but it needs it might need some help with a fungicide. So a little more susceptible than some of the other varieties that we're looking at today, the lineup. So I think this is one for some of those leaf diseases, for the rust diseases. You might need to consider a fungicide in those really disease favorable years for this one to get the most out of your money.
Okay, we have Showdown, and Showdown is another variety from the Oklahoma State breeding program. This one's a little bit newer release there. I think we've seen this for a few years at K-State trials as OK12716. That's how you might have seen it called in the past here. It has OK Rising in the background plus some AgriPro experimentals there. The main thing about Showdown here that Oklahoma is putting is the most widely adapted, one of the most widely adapted varieties, at least from their program. And so that's the one that their breeder believes it's going to move up north considerably more than some of the other ones. Maturity more on that medium to medium late type of maturity, which might be part of the reason why data shows that it might perform well up north as well. It has a good hash and fly tolerance, wide adaptability, very decent on acid soils as well. Now, despite being from OSU, it's not necessarily a grazing variety because it doesn't put as much forage as some of the other Oklahoma varieties put. So, I mean, keep in mind that if you're going for a grazing situation, you might have to ramp up your seeding rate considerably there to make sure that you have enough forage. And it can be a little bit tall, so you might lean every now and then there, as some of the other OSU varieties also does. Any comments there, Kelsey, on Showdown's tolerance to different diseases?
Yeah, and I might punt this one over to Eric. I think we've seen this one a little bit less. Eric, do you have any comments? I know that it stands up pretty well to stripe rust, although we're still trying to validate some of that in our K-State tests.
Yeah, I think Kelsey is right. We haven't had nearly as much experience with Showdown as some other varieties out of Oklahoma State. It looks like it was hanging in there reasonably well to stripe rust and some of these really intense heavy disease pressure type of screening nurseries that we run for some of the breeding programs or the USDA runs, and we have the opportunity to evaluate some varieties there. So we're really thankful for those observations. The Showdown also Oklahoma's maybe it's a step up on some of the septoria type of problems as well. Leaf spotting diseases maybe then not made it very far north, kind of restricted to the southern tier of counties. Showdown may be the exception to that. Be kind of interesting to see where it goes.
Our next one here, WB4303. So we have seen this one for at least 2 or 3 years now. That 3 tells us it's a medium early maturing variety, right? WB43, that 3, it's a medium early maturing variety. Medium short as well. Excellent straw strength on this one. We mentioned before on 4269 that the yield came from several peelers and several small heads. This is kind of the other way around, although it produced a good number of peelers. Generally, they slaughter these off as well, and so it results in some very large, very big heads there with 40 kernels per head many times. So A variety that might be well adapted perhaps to eastern portion of Barton County as we start moving west from there and even getting into Ellis County. Maybe I'd like to see this one under irrigation. This is one that you can really push yields. We have had it in our intensive management trials for a couple of years now, and it's really, really responsive to high yielding conditions, either if those, well, when those are resulting from extra fertilizer input. So it really has the standability to take on those extra fertilizer inputs. But Kelsey, this is one that might require foliar fungicide application, correct?
Yeah, I think so. I think intensive management here is key. I know some of these varieties, to give you the best yield, they need to kind of toss out some of that disease resistance. So this is one that's pretty susceptible across the board. So a good one to watch out for, kind of like grain field, foliar fungicide application to really maximize your yield potential here.
Okay, so KS Western Star is a new release out of the Hayes breeding program, and really a good fit for the Cottonwood district. It brings a lot of different things together. In the background, it's got some bird in the background, which, we'd expect to bring a high level of drought tolerance as well as wheat crow mite resistance going back to TAM 112. So we have some good resistance to wheat streak mosaic, tritica mosaic, and the other virus or mite vector viruses. Yield record on Western Star has been very strong in the preliminary yield trials, medium height, medium maturing. And so, yeah, a really a nice fit. The other line released the same year is KS Dallas. Has a lot of those same attributes in terms of wheat streak resistance, drought tolerance, yield potential. But the one thing that the Western Star, and sorry, Kelsey, to steal thunder here, it brings soil-borne mosaic resistance to the table that that Dallas does not have. And oftentimes that's a trade-off for us when we're in, Ellis and Barton counties where we do have some soil-borne. A lot of our best drought-tolerant varieties don't have soil-borne resistance in them. And so it's kind of a unique package. So definitely one I think we need to, is going to find a home in the Cottonwood district.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think if you have an issue with soil-borne mosaic, you really need to get that resistance in your seed. So I think that makes this a really important one. And also some of that wheat streak mosaic. I think we have seen this as perform pretty well to stripe rust too in some of our initial looks. So I think that makes this a solid disease package across the board, and particularly for some of those viral diseases, which are quite hard to control once you have them established.
SY Grit. So Grit is actually, it has that old variety post rock on its pedigree. So if you've worked with post rock in the past, few things that you can expect similarly here is a pretty good straw strength on Grit. The yield comes again from those very large heads as well, as we just talked about 4303 a little bit ago here. It's a medium early maturing variety, although maturity can change a little bit depending on the photo period there, depending on the day length. So it is more responsive to day length here than some of the other varieties that might be more responsive to temperature only. Decent drought tolerance on Grit here, very good straw strength. Might be a better fit as we move more north a little bit from where you are there towards that post-rock district. And as we get east, for example, if you're in Barton County, perhaps the concern there could be acid soils as we're getting to the eastern side of Barton County there. Although again, I don't think it's a wide acid soils are a widespread problem for the Cottonwood district in general. Eric, any comments there on Grit's response to diseases?
Yeah, like post rock, SY Grit has been moderately susceptible to intermediate on a lot of different diseases, including some of the rust diseases, stripe rust, leaf rust, and wheat streak mosaic, quite vulnerable there. So like Romulo said, I think this is one that's probably better adapted, much like its predecessor post rock, maybe a little bit further north than where we are in either Barton or Ellis County.
Zenda, K-State variety, has been released a few years ago here. More of a central and eastern variety. As I mentioned before, Larry was released in year, and it's more of a central and western uh, type variety. So Zenda really comes as a replacement for Everest. So if you've worked with Everest in the past, this will be the substitute for it with an improved yielding ability. So consistently out yielding Everest there. Medium early maturing variety, medium short, height, very good acid soil tolerance, but it does not offer much in terms of drought tolerance. So as we head west, especially into Ellis County, for example, in the west, it's probably we will have better options out there. So Kelsey, this is one that we typically say in central and eastern Kansas for those acres after corn would be a good option, correct?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So Zenda has some of the kind of the best in the lineup, best available fusarium head blight resistance. So that's good news if you're in one of those areas that has had historical problems with fusarium head blight. And it's also just got a really good package when it comes to leaf rust, stripe rust, septoria, and tan spot. So very resistant or moderately resistant to some of those leaf diseases, which makes it just a good overall package. Just one key red flag is that it is susceptible to wheat streak mosaic. So again, in this part of the state, I think that would be a concern. So that would be the only watch out from the plant health perspective for Zenda.
Yeah, maybe just one thought there, Kelsey, was that it seems like we've seen stripe rust increasing a little bit in Zenda, like we have some other varieties. So I think maybe in the next couple of years, we may want to keep a little closer eye on Zenda than historically we've had to for the stripe rust.
So Chrome is likely the latest maturing variety that is in the Cottonwood plots. So it is late maturing. It's got a decent height to it. Straw strength is really good with it as well. So it is a nice wheat to help our rotations out. Problem is though, is I think maybe in the Cottonwood district, we're trying to push it a little too far south. When you look the last couple of years in both the Hayes and Ellsworth County or Lorain performance test, Chrome's kind of been average at best. And so I think part of that is maybe we're trying to go a little too far south with it. There's some things I like about Chrome as we move further north. It does well, and we've had some success with it in some areas of western Kansas. But I don't know. I guess I'm a little bit on the fence with it for the Cottonwood district, and certainly as we move further south into Barton County and onto the sand, I become a lot less comfortable with it.
Yeah, I think Lucas nailed it, that maybe it's a little out of range, a little too far south. The big watch out would be wheat streak mosaic, although we have seen pretty good stripe rust control on Chrome, and this is another one like Zenda that Eric and I are watching, because historically it's had, again, stripe rust resistance, but we're seeing a little more stripe rust than we would like. So it's something to watch that has historically been really great against some of those leaf diseases, but we're starting to see some of them overcome this resistance. So we're going to have to keep watching.
Okay, Langen's been out for a couple of years. A Colorado State release has bird in its background, which then does have some wheat chromite resistance. That helps us out, obviously, on wheat streak mosaic. Unlike a lot of the Colorado varieties, this tends to be more of a medium, actually more of a medium early maturing variety. Straw strength, it's not as tall as we generally like to see in some of our wheats, and also straw strength is kind of average at best. And so those are some of the drawbacks. Drought tolerance on it is excellent, and yield performance in the Western Kansas trials anyways has been exceptionally strong out of Langen. So gives us some of that drought tolerance in more of a medium early type package.
WB 4418. So 4418 is a medium to medium early maturing variety out of West Bred program. The main thing with 4418 here is that it is a semi-solid stem type variety. So whenever, well, if soft lie is an issue, might be an option there. So probably we're really looking more into the western tier of counties in Kansas and west into Colorado there as adaptability for this variety. Pretty good straw strength with that semi-solid stem there. Medium short variety with that straw strength, it also kind of responds to management. But again, I think that this variety would be more of a western variety, than even western than where we are there in Ellis County. Eric, any comments on 4418?
No, I think you've pretty much hit it there. I probably would go west and maybe even into the northwest area with 4418. It has been doing reasonably well on a lot of different diseases, but probably the key characteristic here is that solid or semi-solid stem that can bring some resistance to the sawfly.
Okay, so you may be familiar, in years past, we've talked about the Clearfield production system in terms of having some in-season grass control and wheat. Now we also have the coaxium system that's available out on the market. And so LCS Fusion is one of the first varieties. So this is developed as a joint venture between Colorado State and Lima Grain. So Fusion has a background involving bird and hatcher, both of which, at least in western Kansas, were pretty well proven varieties. As we move further south and east, especially by the time we get down into Barton County, I'm not sure. I wonder if we might have some better options out there for in-season grass control, perhaps with double stop, or I don't know. So we got some different. We'll see how it performs as we take it a little bit out of what might be its most home-like environment.
Yeah, the only comment I have here is that if you're going to use this technology, you might need to consider a fungicide in those disease conducive years, because it is susceptible, this variety LCS Fusion, to stripe rust, stem rust, and leaf rust, and some of the other leaf diseases. Moderate to wheat streak mosaic, but it's definitely one that might require a fungicide application to really maximize the use of this particular technology.
Coming up next here, we have Lone Rider. So Lone Rider is another variety from the Oklahoma State breeding program. We've seen it now for 3 years in a row. It is a variety that was released with area of adaptation in mind of the Oklahoma Panhandle into western Kansas and Colorado, and it has performed really well. So if we look back 3 years in a row, 2 years, or even last year, it's always consistently in the top yielding group in that region. It is kind of like an earlier maturing variety. As you can see in the photo there, it's quite short as well. With that, it has like excellent straw strength, right? Pretty good and rapid establishment in the fall, and apparently pretty decent drought tolerance there. So again, going based on their yield record in southwest and northwest Kansas, it has done quite well in the last 3 years. One thing to keep in mind is that it is short, so it's not going to leave much residue behind. And many times in those dry land systems in that area, having that amount of residue is quite important for the rotation, as where many times growers are growing wheat for that residue coming up for their corn crop. So that's the main concern to keep in mind, is that relatively short, but very good yield record in western Kansas there. Any comments there, Eric, on Lone Rider's disease package?
One of the things that's kind of curious about Lone Rider is that, unlike most Oklahoma State varieties, Lone Rider has vulnerability to stem rust, and that's something we're a little concerned about, increasing vulnerability in west and some areas of central Kansas. So I think I'd be a little cautious with that. We don't want to have too many acres planted to highly susceptible stem rust susceptible varieties. Historically, that's been a disease we've controlled very well through our genetic resistance, and honestly, we've let that resistance erode out of our wheat variety lineup in recent years. So be a little careful with that. Oklahoma is reporting this one as that does have some resistance to stripe rust. maybe a little bit weaker on some of the leaf rust side of things. Interesting, Oklahoma didn't provide any ratings for wheat streak mosaic, but I don't have any reason to believe that this would be above average from that characteristic. So kind of interesting, good yield potential there. I think it's done well in some of our trials, but be a little cautious with some of the unusual susceptibilities in Lone Rider.
And I guess this brings us to the last one of this plot here, Stacy, SY Rugged. Rugged Syngenta release out of, we've seen it for at least 3 years now, has a domes on its background, rear end domes, and so brings a pretty decent test weight to the table. Initially thought of more of adaptation of like Southwest Kansas environment with a decent drought tolerance. But if we look at the yield record in Western Kansas, Southwest, and Northwest, it has been about average at best. And so usually a bushel or two per acre below average. And so really, I haven't seen the yield record there to convince me to go to this variety as compared to some of the other more perhaps higher yielding, more stable yielding varieties in that part of the state. Any comments there, Kelsey or Eric, on the disease package for Rugged?
I apologize. I'm hearing a siren, and I'm new to Kansas. Does that mean there's a tornado coming? I don't know. But I guess from the disease resistant side of things, you know, I think we've seen this one less. It seems to be holding up intermediately to stripe rust and leaf rust in our trials, and they're advertising it as having pretty good stem, leaf, and stripe rust resistance. So I think that might be a key intermediate to wheat streak mosaic. So nothing special there, and also nothing special when it comes to fusarium head blight. So, so those would be the key. Oh, it's a test. Okay, thanks, Eric. Those would be the key characteristics from my end for SY Rugged. Sorry about the siren drama there.
And maybe, thanks, Kelsey there. Stacy, maybe just before we wrap up, perhaps, Lucas, would you like to make some comments on KS Dallas, which might be another pretty good fit there for the region? What do you think?
Yeah, so as we visited about Western Star, Dallas, again, also brings some wheat streak mosaic resistance to the table and a really strong yield record. Pretty comparable in terms of maturity and height. Maybe, if I remember right, maybe not quite as good in straw strength, but still, pretty average that way. I think both of those we'll see them replace Tatanka and Oakley on a lot of acres. But so yeah, I think it's I think a key thing there will be is if I know in Ellis and Barton counties we kind of have some patchiness in history of soil-borne mosaic, and so if that's a concern, I think that would really help you make the difference between the two. But Western Ellis County, up along the Trigo County line, I think you'd be fine with either of those.
Okay, well, with that, I know you guys got to head on and do another one of these. You're just knocking them out one after the other. So we appreciate Romulo, Kelsey, Eric, and Lucas joining us for our first virtual wheat plot field day here for the Cottonwood District. One of the things I didn't have on the beginning slides there was the directions to the plot. The one in Barton County is just 1/8 of a mile, if that far, north of Susank, right on the blacktop on the east side. And we've got the signs up, so you'll see it. And I've even got a little information box there that's got the listing of the varieties and the cultural practices. And in the Ellis County wheat plot, it's kind of in the normal area it's been for a number of years. If you're on the interstate, that's kind of the best way to tell how to get to it. You just take the Victoria exit, go 2 miles south on Cathedral Avenue, and you'll see it on the east side there, and the signs are up as well. There's been paths cut out for people to go look at it, so I encourage folks to go take a look at those plots. And once again, we thank our cooperators, L&N Farming, Leon and Norbert Kuhn in Ellis County, and Mike Radetsky in Barton County. And we thank our specialists for coming on board, and we'll let you guys go so you can go do your other 20 virtual field days here in the next few days, or however many it is.
Thanks, Stacy.
Hopefully your voices hold out.
Well, we
Thanks.
don't need to use our field voice here, right? So that's you might hold.
Yeah, that helps. Okay. Well, anything else, folks? I guess if not, we'll conclude. Thank y'all.